My name's Joe. I'm one of the customer success managers for education at Vevox, and I'm joined by one of our customers, Dr. David Reed from the University of Southampton. Now, I am neither a learning technologist nor am I a lecturer. So you might be asking, what am I doing here, and why am I giving this presentation? Actually, I have my colleague Amy Fletcher, who's actually in the audience today, to thank for that. She gave a presentation at the conference by the ALT East of England, giving a sort of an insight into sort of our response to the COVID crisis and what it was kind of like from our side. So what I thought I'd do was take a little bit of that and extend it up until the sort of present day. But what I also wanted to do was to bring in sort of a member of our community and one of our customers to sort of share their insights around around the community really, and the how how it was kind of sort of put under strain at the sort of the beginning, and where we are sort of now, and looking at sort of teaching practices then that were kind of brought in a sort of an emergency fashion, and whether they're still sort of fit for purpose going into the future. So what does this sort of year look like for us? So I started drawing out this timeline, and I wanted to put some dates in there for when when certain events happened during the year, and I very quickly found that the whole year seems to have sort of blurred into sort of one thing. So I really struggled to sort of to pinpoint some exact dates when these things happened, but I do remember a stage when everything started to sort of close down, whether that be sort of workplaces, institutions, and all of that went into lockdown. I remember coming back out of it, and now I think about the sort of the new term, or the start of this term, which has been very different to any kind of term that I can remember, and looking ahead into the future. So I've divided my section up into talking a little bit about our kind of initial responses at Vevox to the sort of crisis that was unfolding, how we very quickly went about sort of changing our sort of product roadmap for the year, and why we sort of made certain decisions around that, and why we chose not to do some things for sort of short-term fixes, and then talking about going beyond those emergency measures, and what the sort of the future might like, and that leads quite nicely to David, who will then sort of share some of his stories and case studies. So our initial what was our initial response? So when the sort of crisis sort of first happened, I remember just how quiet the community was. I remember being a customer success manager, my every day was speaking with learning technologists and lecturers who are using Vevox or interested in using Vevox, and I remember the weeks and weeks just going by where it was virtually impossible to speak with anyone. So for us as a sort of an EdTech provider, everything that we do is comes from our customers and comes from our community. So it was very, very hard just not knowing what was going on. But I do remember, sitting down with our MD and other members of the leadership team, and deciding very early on that the main thing that we wanted to do at this time was to be able to help, to help people. The few people that we could, that we did speak to, gave us feedback that actually they felt that they were quite, they were getting inundated with phone calls from EdTech providers who were potentially offering to solve all of the problems that they were facing at this time. And we recognise that that Vevox isn't going to be able to or isn't able to solve all of those problems, but it was able to help with some of them. So we really wanted to just help people. So we quickly decided that actually, if anyone who was using our product for free, which has some limited functionality, if they wanted access to the full functionality, all they had to do was ask us, and we would give them an upgrade, no questions asked. And we decided that would be until the end of August, and then we'd review it then. Something else that was really concerning in those first sort of 2 or 3 weeks was the drop off in usage of our product. So as well as everyone going quiet, in terms of trying to make sort of phone calls and emails, actually we looked at the usage stats of the product, and they were going down as well. So it was quite a worrying time for us as a company, because we thought that the product that we offer is designed and works in an online environment. It's cloud based. So our thinking was that actually usage would probably stay the same, but would more than likely grow as the world sort of pivoted to online. So it was quite worrying during those first few weeks. Luckily, once those initial weeks passed, we did see that sort of rebound, and actually I think our usage now is at sort of 5 times what it was the same time last year. So one of the things that we had to do sort of after that kind of initial response was have a look at our product, and have a look at the roadmap for development. And there was a sort of a balancing act that needed to be done, because we had our product roadmap at that point set in stone pretty much for the year. It was all sort of laid out what we were going to be doing that year. And not on there, or at least not in the very short term, were things like integrating with Microsoft Teams and Zoom. But it became quite obvious quite quickly that these were tools that people were going to be using, and that they would want to be using Vevox within them. So we made a decision that actually we would sort of rewrite the product roadmap for the year, and look at some of the immediate needs that the people had, and what they were asking for, and look at how we can sort of improve them. So the main ones were looking at sort of Teams and Zoom, and then also potentially bringing in sort of webcasting. And then we also decided that we were going to put our sort of survey feature into our free plans as well, so to be able to sort of support asynchronous type activities. So after we'd made all those, after we sort of made those sort of changes, and decided what our initial response was going to be, we had to sort of start looking at the future, and looking at the looking at the start of the new turn, and what our kind of mantra of sort of valuing every voice was going to mean during this time. So as I'm sure some of you might be aware, as a company, we used to have another name, and we went through a sort of rebranding exercise over a year ago now, and came up with the name Vevox. And the name comes from this idea of valuing every voice. So what does that mean? What does that sort of mean now? Well, to me, it means being able to kind of contribute and engage with the lecture, with the class, with the meeting, wherever you are. So I don't know what sort of teaching next year looks like, but it could very well look like a combination of face-to-face and sort of virtual sessions, and maybe a hybrid of both. And one of the really nice things about Vevox is that if you're in the room, or you are watching remotely, if you write a comment, you ask a question, you respond to a vote, your voice is exactly the same. Your contribution is exactly the same, particularly when you're running it in an anonymous way. Supporting live and asynchronous type activities, and I think sort of David's going to give some examples of those when he sort of takes over in a second. And then finally, sort of thinking about how introducing kind of engagement, through Vevox, taking away that, breaking down that moment when you're delivering a session and you're just met with a series of black screens where people aren't turning their camera on, aren't contributing, or and engaging, and what sort of impact that potentially has on sort of students' mental health, and their kind of dropout rate from universities. So all of these things are in our minds as we're supporting our customers right now and in the future, but also in our kind of development plans. And I think that hands over quite nicely to David, who is going to talk about some of the sort of practical things that they've been doing at the University of Southampton using Vevox.
Thanks, Joe. So I think my microphone's working. Put something in the chat if not. So if we go back to March, I'm sure you all remember that feeling, that sinking feeling perhaps that we had. And I'm just putting this on the screen here just to show. This was in the middle of March. We actually shut our teaching down. So Joe was talking about their usage falling off. Well, part of the reason that Southampton was we actually finished our term a week early, sent the students packing, while we then spent a bit of time working out what we were going to do. So my first experience of actually doing any of this stuff online was a staff development session that had been scheduled for this time. And I decided on the morning, that I wasn't going to travel to Southampton. It was just when everything was kicking off with COVID, I was going to run the session online in Teams, just drop myself right in it and drop my audience in it and just see how it goes. Now, in the session I was running, which is about flipped learning and active learning, I always use Vevox. So this was the acid test for me. Will this work if I'm doing this online? Well, we had a lot of staff present and we used some word cloud questions from Vevox. We got responses. It meant that I wasn't actually talking into a void, which was what I was worried about. People were actually listening and engaging, and that experience of getting that feedback from people that were participating actually gave me the confidence that this stuff was going to work and that I didn't need to worry quite so much about my teaching that was coming up. So that was a good starter for us, and nice to actually work with staff and also give them the confidence that this could work, and hopefully get a few more of them using it in their online teaching. So over the Easter period, we were then planning for what we were going to do for the rest of the semester. The final 4 weeks of teaching we hadn't actually completed. And actually we decided to put, for my foundation year course, which I'm showing here, we put lots of the teaching in asynchronous formats. So recorded lectures, problem sets that students would work through, but with talking mark schemes that are videos that go through the answers. So they could do all this asynchronously. We also had some office hours sessions where students could drop in and ask questions about the asynchronous content. But on the right-hand side, actually, the key thing that I was focusing on was this synchronous online workshop session at the end of the week where we would bring everything together. And I was imagining that we had a bunch of students in front of us who we knew well already, and they knew us really well. So I was expecting quite a lot of engagement, quite a lot of participation on their part. But as many people experienced, the students were very worried about putting their cameras and microphones on. They preferred to kind of hide in the shadows, and that did make things quite difficult. Joe was talking about mental health for students. Actually, I think the mental health of staff can be affected if you're just talking to a blank screen all day long. So actually, that was where Vevox came in really handy, because even though the students weren't prepared to put their cameras on and talk to me, they were prepared to respond. And actually, this really helped to build that dialogue that's really important in any learning community. So just some examples here. I know they're quite small on the screen there, but every week when I ran one of these sessions, I asked the students how they'd been getting on with the work they'd been doing. And what it's showing you is that the responses at the bottom end of that scale, top left there, are the ones that indicate the students had done the work. So that was reassuring as a lecturer. For the questions where you can see the green and red bars, they're conceptual questions where the green bars show correct responses and the red ones show incorrect responses. So if we were worried about our students actually learning online, actually there was some reassurance there that if they're getting some of the answers right, that probably indicates they're learning something from that online teaching. So that was a nice thing. But where you see a red bar, that's a misconception that you can then address and give some feedback to the students. So again, this was supporting that dialogue and making sure there was the two-way conversation that you need in any kind of teaching experience. And I tried a few other things. On the right, top right there, you see an example of a question which is a numerical question in Vevox that I'd never tried before. And this prompted me to give it a go. Just the ones at the bottom right and in the middle at the bottom there, you can see a couple of examples of questions that normally I would ask in person, just verbally at the end of a session. So have you read your feedback from that presentation yet? And you anecdotally get the response that most of them have. Well, actually doing it this way, I was able to see that 3/4 of them actually had, and I was able to say, oh, that's great. So the rest of you that haven't, make sure that you go away and do that. And you can see there, the bottom right, that was just asking them about an assignment that I'd set. So just those kinds of conversations that you'd always just have at the end of a session, this actually just gave us the opportunity to have that conversation with them. Now, my screen is frozen. I don't know if you can hear me. So
we can still hear
I'm
you fine.
I can you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So something's gone wrong with my screen, but I'm actually in here on 2 devices, so I'm going to try to control the slides from the other one.
Okay, let us know. If not, I can happily advance the slides for you. We're currently seeing the CAGP Festival slide.
Yes, brilliant. So I've got that. I can see it on my other screen. Thanks, Marin. So yes, so basically what I was just finishing off there was saying that kept that dialogue going with our students, and then we were able to send them packing over the summer while we then thought about what we're going to do for next year. So one of our big events that we run is the CHEP Festival of Learning and Teaching, CHEP being the Centre for Higher Education Practice. I worked with some students to create a session where they actually led the session and they were polling staff using Vevox. So it's quite a different way of establishing that community between staff and students. And that was a really popular session, one of the highlights of the festival. And you can see there that was the staff there. We were asking the staff how they felt. And you can see overwhelmingly, actually, people were more on the nervous and anxious side of the spectrum. And this gave the students a chance to say, well, actually, look, we're in this together. And these are reasons why perhaps you shouldn't be anxious. Try to be more positive. And it's quite good to hear that coming from students rather than it being the staff saying that to the students. So that was quite nice. So there you go. I think I've got control back. That seems okay. So thinking about prep for the next academic year. So we spoke to our students last year. As I said, one of the issues we had was that they weren't putting their cameras on. They weren't discussing things with us. We wanted to get that dialogue working properly. And the suggestions from the students here, when we asked them, it was all about having small group activities. So that got us thinking about breakout groups, which has been something we've been doing a lot of work with over the last semester. And I've been trying to use Vevox to enhance the engagement and participation and learning in those. And I'll talk about some examples. It was really important to do this right from the beginning of the year. We had a new cohort of students now, people we hadn't met before. And during our induction session, we actually put them into breakout groups to discuss which questions they wanted to ask us. So rather than us bombarding them with information in induction, which we normally do, the idea was that they would actually generate the questions that we would address. And we anticipated that the questions they would ask would probably be the same kinds of things that we would normally be communicating to them. But by getting them to ask the question, it was giving them ownership over that. And they might actually listen a bit better than they would if we just hit them with all the information at once. And this was a nice feature. So they discussed in the groups which questions they wanted to ask. You can see some of them listed there on the right. And we got them to upvote the ones that they were most interested in. And then we were able to focus the rest of that session on those specific questions. And that worked really well. And that'll be something we'll probably carry on in the future, even though we did it just for this sort of unique year. Hopefully it's unique. But going forward, we can pick some of this technology up and use it in our sort of more normal teaching, if that's a way to phrase it. Another thing I've talked about quite a lot previously is using this peer instruction approach, which was developed by Eric Mazur at Harvard. So an example that's shown here, you poll a question to the students. As shown on the left, that's the initial response. If I were doing this in a live session, they would then talk to the people around them. I advise them to try to find somebody who gave a different answer to them so they can thrash out the theory and hopefully settle on a joint understanding of what the correct answer is. And then you poll the question again, and you get the response as seen on the right, the follow-up, where they've drifted towards the correct answer, which is air in this case. So what we did with our breakout groups was to do the same thing. We would poll questions beforehand and then put them into breakout groups to discuss their responses and then bring them back to the main session and poll again. You can do exactly the same thing you would normally do. But anyone that's used breakout groups will appreciate you tend to lose a bit of time at the beginning and the end. And if you were doing that for lots of peer instruction questions, half your session would be wasted. So I've tended to combine the questions together. I'll just finish off with some examples. So here you can see 3 chemistry questions that we polled the students with consecutively. I didn't share the responses with them at that time. This was just to prime them for then going into the breakout room. And when they were in the breakout room, they had access to a shared PowerPoint slide. You can see just there, a bit small on the screen, I know, bottom right. And there they had the 3 questions, and they could discuss those in their groups. And you'll see the little blue bits of text. They could edit that and add their explanations, having had that discussion with each other. And then they came back to the main room, and we polled the questions again and then talked through the answers. Now, again, this will be very small on the screen. You won't really be able to see it, but on the left, they're the results from before. So actually, they weren't the best peer instruction questions, as a majority of students were getting them right to start with. So about 65% getting the first one right first time round, about 90% getting the second one, and probably somewhere around 60% for the third one. But if you look on the right, after they'd been in the breakout rooms, had those discussions, they came back, we polled the questions again, and virtually 100% of students were getting them right. And we asked them about why was that? What did you gain from the breakout room there? And they said that the conversations helped them to develop their confidence. They felt much more confident about the answers. So even if they'd got it right the first time, a lot of them were still not 100% sure that they were on the right track. But after those conversations with their peers, they felt much more confident and came back and, as you can see, responded really positively with overwhelmingly correct answers. So we found that combining Vevox with the breakout room approach has allowed us to build the community of learners that we like to have in our face-to-face sessions. Obviously, not everybody engages as much as you would like, but actually, if you look around the room in person, they're not always engaging as much as you would like in that environment. So I'm actually a big fan of all of this stuff, and I hope we're going to carry on doing some more of it in the future. And I'd like to thank Joe and the Vevox team for the evolution of the software over time as it's getting more and more powerful. So just a few examples there to share, but thanks very much for listening. Back to you, Joe. Do you want to round things up?
Yeah, sure. I was actually just going to hand over to Robert.
Sure.
Hey, that's fine. I'm quite happy with that. Thank you. Yeah, brilliant. Really enjoyed that. Yeah, especially the great bit about using Missoula's peer instruction in breakout rooms. Yeah, terrific idea. I've put a link in the chat if anyone's interested. He did a great keynote at AltC in 2012. That was still great watching, really good. But yeah, that's a terrific use of Vevox and breakout rooms, and great pedagogy, great technology. Yeah, I was yeah. Of course, if anyone's got any questions, please do pop them in the chat. I was just wondering. I mean, I guess it was a bit of an obvious question, really. I was just wondering if you did any sort of correlations with the some of those earlier questions where you were sort of fairly sure it was the students who hadn't watched the lectures were the ones that were tending towards the incorrect answers.
That's a really good suggestion. So we tend to run the polls anonymously. We have thought about getting them to sign in, and then we could potentially use the data in that way. So yeah, I mean, that would be, it seems like one of those obvious things to suggest, but actually without having the data, you can't make assumptions, right? So that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean, it would be, I guess it's one of those things that would be nice, but then, you've then got all those other problems where perhaps the students are going to be much more reluctant to take part if they're going to be, their responses are known. I think that idea of this sort of anonymous poll, it really means that it's a genuine learning experience, and it really doesn't matter whether you get the question right or wrong. At that point, no one's going to know about it.
No, but having said that, sometimes students have said to me, actually, it'd be quite nice if you could send us some feedback. So potentially, if we logged all of their responses in a spreadsheet, we could auto-generate some feedback that we'd send them by mail merge. We've done that with some things in the past. So some students have said they'd be quite happy for it not to be anonymous, but we know that there are others that really don't want it to change. So it's a difficult one.
I think it is. I think it's very tricky. I mean, I've spoken to academics before, and their engagement has soared when responses were able to be anonymous, and people were much cagier before. So it's perhaps, you know, a worthwhile trade-off. You know, okay, you can't quite go into that detail with the data, but it's, you know, it makes for better engagement, which of course is, you know, the most important thing.
Absolutely.
But yeah, yeah, it's terrific. Thank you ever so much for that. That was great. And you know, so yeah, thank you, Michael, for your first presentation, and Joe and David. Been a really interesting session.